I grew up in a Buddhist family in post-war Vietnam. My childhood was lived in extreme poverty. For many years of my young life, I didn't reject what I had grown up with. I just felt unclaimed by it. I felt like my heart was shaped for something that I hadn't encountered yet. Fast forward to the beginning of the pandemic, and I had lost my job. I was unemployed. I was losing what felt like the only closest person to me at the time. I was born in post-war Vietnam. My father was a South Vietnamese army officer, and afterwards he was imprisoned in concentration camps for nearly 7 years. Several years after he came back from the war, I was born. My childhood was lived in extreme poverty. We had no running water, no electricity, and food was always in short supply. My father was an extremely devout Buddhist, and so he would always take me to the local temple. I was surrounded by traditions, practices, and rituals that belonged to that path. For the longest time, I just accepted it and I just followed him there. Buddhism was my cultural heritage. It was my upbringing. It was my identity. But even as a child, I felt like something was missing. I felt a longing in my heart for something that I couldn't explain. I sensed this desperation, this deeper need for a deeper kind of truth, a different kind of connection. For many years of my young life, I didn't reject what I had grown up with. I just felt unclaimed by it. I felt like my heart was shaped for something that I hadn't encountered yet. By the time I was 11 years old, I decided that Buddhism was not for me. And so I mustered up all the courage within myself to face my father and tell him, the dreaded words, I'm not going back, I won't go back. And that was the end of that. No more pagodas, no more incense and bowing down to statues. And for many years after that, I drifted somewhere between atheism and agnosticism. This poem is called Dasein, which means being there. It was inspired by the philosopher Martin Heidegger, and it gives you a sense of the countryside or pastoral upbringing that I grew up in. Dasein. Slowly she dances in the fields aglow with golden weeded rhythm. Flows of fabric down her knees as she sways and is one with what the earth makes grow. Far off passers-by, sighting the fleck with flushed aura stalks, gaze out inquiringly, hands shading eyes to glimpse the form, to follow in its weightlessness. How she moves through a trail snaking past uneven squares of rationed land, whose earth now bare, now hooved dimples, where lately a trio of oxen have left impressions of their bovine weight, followed by human tracks, trudging along a dim trajectory. Plow-injured soil, sweet-scented, cooled by nights falling, as one red pail bobs homeward, tins clinking clean of rice, smelt, chopsticks, and tea. She moves as though there were no land division, no borders, no countries. She moves as the leaves are moved by the wind's gentle soughing. Days urge toward evening, leaving something there in the manner of her shape. After I graduated from high school, I chose to attend Baylor, which is a private Christian university in the South. And the reason why I chose to go there was because Baylor has a strong foundation in service and community. Now, for the first time in my life, I was being introduced to Christianity not just as an idea or a cultural presence, but to the Bible itself and to the person of Jesus. Jesus was a compassionate character. He was philosophical. He was confrontational in all the right ways. And he was deeply human, yet deeply mysterious. And I found myself curious and wanting to know more. This was the first time in my life that something had an impact on me on a spiritual level. Even though I didn't want to admit it, there was something about him that caused cracks within the intellectual walls that I had built up. It was a time in my life where I had a lot of resistance inside myself, this huge silent iceberg of skepticism and doubt. I didn't want to be moved. I didn't want anything to get through. My heart was very defensive and suspicious and shut down. But whenever the character of Jesus appeared, I felt within myself a kind of shift, like I wanted to sit up a little bit straighter. One of the reasons for that was the red-lettered wordings that were things that Jesus had said. They pierced through me, through all of the defenses that I had spent years building up. And his words began to chip away at the internal iceberg that I had in myself. It wasn't a dramatic moment of epiphany. It was more like a very slow and gradual turning of the heart. Fast forward to February 2020, I was living in New York City and I was working for the city of New York. Then very suddenly I lost my job, and it was a traumatizing loss. It came out of nowhere. It was unexpected, and it felt like a huge betrayal from life because I had spent my life working very hard. I was an achievement-oriented person. I was a straight-A student. I was a scholarship winner. And so I was at a loss as to why it was happening to me. It was the beginning of the pandemic, and everything was starting to shut down. And then the pandemic happened, and we were on lockdown for 3 months long. So for 3 months, we couldn't leave our apartment. We saw all the bad news on the internet. We saw the death tolls increase by the day. We saw the unmarked graves, the body bags, and we felt this tremendous helplessness to be able to do anything, and we couldn't even leave our apartment. To get food, we had to order it from online for them to deliver it to our home. Meanwhile, on the outside, things were crumbling in this catastrophic and global way. Inside myself, I was dealing with a tremendous amount of grief over the loss of my job. And I had a roommate at the time. She was a grad student from China. By about June or July, she decided to leave to go back to her home country to be with her husband. So I had lost my job. I was unemployed. I was losing what felt like the only closest person to me at the time. On top of that, I was having to pay the rent by myself, which was nearly $2,000, money that I barely had, living off of unemployment. As the months wore on, my health started to decline, my physical health, my mental health. By November of that year, it got really bad, and by December, I ended up in the hospital. I was hospitalized for almost 3 weeks, and during that time, I had no one. There was no family, no friends to visit me. It was during the pandemic, so no one was going anywhere. So I was desperately alone, dealing with grief and loss. And sense of failure, sense of humiliation. And while I was in the hospital, I spent days and nights thinking how I could fix my life. Who would help me to fix it? And it felt like there was no one there. But in the midst of that, there was a girl who was in the room next to me, and she was reading the Bible. So in a last-ditch effort, I decided to ask for a Bible too, because there was nothing left. So I thought, well, I'll just give that a try, and I'll have what she's having. Maybe her life is better than mine. Maybe I can fix it by just reading something. And so I took that Bible back to my room, and thank God it was the New Testament, because if it was Old Testament, I would have, been even more confused and lost. I started reading the Gospels at first. I went through them one by one, and at the end of the Gospels, I had this moment of realization, and it hit me like a ton of bricks. This is the truth. This is reality. That Jesus is real, that he is God, and that he came and entered into our brokenness to help us. And in those days that followed, I experienced the purest peace. It was a peace that I had never known before, ever since I was a child. That wasn't the end of it, though, because I still was battling my doubt, my skepticism. So I spent a year after that in doubt, questioning myself, wondering, is this real? Am I crazy? Going through all of the logical reasoning why I should or shouldn't believe. Finally, somewhere around the end of the next year, I felt this fire within me to go back to read the Old Testament, to try to understand who God is and how is he connected to Jesus. And I was reading day and night. I was reading like 8 hours a day of just the Bible, because I was a philosophy student, and so I really tried to understand from a rational perspective. What is this? Who is this? After I finished reading all of the Old Testament, again, everything became so clear. And after that, I decided I have to get baptized. This is the reality, and I accept Jesus into my heart. I recently started a blog on the themes of faith, fashion, and finer things, and this is an excerpt from that blog. I write personal essays once every 2 weeks, and this essay is called Faith in the Fog, My Journey Through Unknowing. Throughout those years at university, I didn't run recklessly into the altars of conversion. Neither did I shout hallelujah with any kind of holy abandon. But I kept returning to the stories, the woman who bathed his feet in precious oils, the one who bled unendingly in the crowd, the thief who was promised paradise upon his final breath. They were all outsiders, all wrecked and ruined in some way, marred by life, deposed like some tree in a monsoon clearing. Yet still he saw them and spoke to them like they were whole long before they were healed. I never understood his attention to the weak, the shattered, those who were like me. This was perhaps what unsettled me the most, his attention to the ones who were damaged. I wasn't sure I wanted to be seen like that, like a naked person who was still invited to come in. As more and more time went by, my reappearances began to seem less like interest and more like hunger. It could not be fed by skillful theology or savvy sermons, but was of a deeper kind, the kind that comes back around after everything else has failed. Nearly 2 decades later, I would find myself reading his words in the light and in the dark, unceasingly, no longer for curiosity, but to be comforted and held inside the mysteries of heaven and earth. Here was a man who touched the untouchable, dined with the shameful, and wept with freedom. For a long time, I stayed at my safe distance, but from there, it made me wonder if belonging in his presence wasn't about proving something, but about finally surrendering the need. Maybe his grace was not a trophy for the convinced, but a harbor for the hesitant. And somehow, just maybe, he'd have seen me. He'd have had me in mind all along, and was waiting for me to notice that I was not too far gone to be claimed. It would take a very long time for my trusty resistance to thaw. It's loosening up like a thick sheet of ice across the ocean water by a slow and all-encompassing sunlight. It was not dramatic and with fanfare, but was dogged and time-worn. In my younger years, my refusal to fall on my knees in repentance was an act of intellectual restraint. Later, when things would get worse in my life, that restraint would become something less and less essential. I no longer needed the comfort of being right. I needed not to hurt anymore. Like a boat cut loose, I drifted toward him, carried by ache more than by assurance. My questions didn't disappear. They grew more soft-hearted, less like daggers and more like windows after a lifetime of cabin fever. Very gradually, I stopped needing intellectual correctness to begin to trust in the voice that called me his. It was a turning point, a surrender. And perhaps grace, after all, is an invitation. It isn't just a gateway accessible to the holy, but a door left ajar for the wandering, the questioning, the doubtful, a gap just enough for someone like me to come limping through. Growing up in today's world takes a special kind of courage. Every day we're holding inside of ourselves so many feelings of powerlessness, helplessness, despair, and the pressure of having to hold it all together. If you felt this way, then you are not alone. The fact that your heart hasn't given up, even under the strain of so much pressure and so many challenges, speaks to the strength that's in you. Wanting a life that's more peaceful, more meaningful, more grounded, there's something sacred in that. I invite you into the precious and powerful presence of Jesus and of His Holy Spirit. You don't have to make this journey alone. There are places out there for people like you who are searching, trying to learn, rebuilding, fixing, trying to find a place of belonging. If you feel even the faintest pull towards faith, then I encourage you to find a local church. It may not be perfect on the first try, but if you go there and you find that it gives you comfort and clarity for the place that you are in, then keep going and keep trying. If you've been hurt by the church, I see you, I hear you, but the church is not a perfect place, and that's why Jesus came. He came to save us, broken, shattered people like you and me. Keep seeking healing for the hurt that you've been through, and don't give up. Your pain is not small and invisible. It matters a lot to God. Even in places where others have failed you in relationship, even in places of loss and grief and betrayal, God is there, and His love has never wavered. Let Him meet you in the places where you've been hurt, and piece by piece, He will put it together again and help you to move on. You are not alone. There is grace, there is hope, and there is a way forward that leads to wholeness. My name is Alexandrine Vo, and this is my testimony about my time in New York and how I found the Lord out of my place of loss, failure, humiliation, and finding the strength to move on again out of that place of things falling apart.